Welcome to the Beesies.
I'm Abby.
I'm Brittany.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Mackenzie.
Remember the college days when you were best friends with your roommates?
You would come home and talk about anything and everything together.
We miss this phase so much that we decided we needed this quality roommate time again.
So welcome to the Beesies. Come over and get cozy with your new favorite roommates.
Welcome back and happy Monday.
Hello, all our fellow Beesies. Welcome to the Beezy Podcast.
I was just listening to this podcast, and at the beginning they say who they are, and I was like, oh, we never do that. But I forget that our intro, we literally say who we are.
Intro.
Yeah, I just forgot.
I don't feel like our intro sounds like us, though.
No, I sound like, and I'm Mackenzie.
We should, okay, only bit of housekeeping for our listeners before we jump into this week's topic. Should we redo our intro? We will put up a question box. Oh, never mind. Okay, we will. I think we should. I think we can simplify it a little bit at this point. Yeah.
I think we should sing.
Ooh. A harmonized a cappella just intro. No music.
Yeah.
Just singing.
I think I'm going to be traumatized by that, but...
Yeah, same. That's okay. We love a little trauma. Builds character, right?
Right, exactly.
That's facts. Speaking
Alrighty.
of trauma.
I was just going to say, what a segue.
What a
Just
segue.
kidding. This week, if you follow us on Instagram, you know that we are talking about our experiences growing up Mormon. And a preface to all of this is we're all a little, not all of us, some of us are a little nervous about this, but not really. We're also excited because we casually talk about our experiences, but we haven't done a full episode dedicated to it yet. So it'll be kind of fun to do, I think.
And it's been a very requested episode from people, at least from what I understand from the messages I've been seeing. People want to hear about this, I guess. So, because obviously everybody knows, we talk about it, that we are or have grown up in the church. And I also feel like there's this not weird, but obsession with religion and Mormonism recently. It's been started by TikTok and stuff. So it's just a hot topic, and whether you are also Mormon or also grew up Mormon and want to just be validated in your feelings, or you are a complete never Mormon and never heard about anything, you are just curious and want to know more. So, hopefully it's interesting for lots of different groups of people. Yeah.
Yes. I think it's important to say too, we talked about this a little bit before. Our disclaimer for this is our experience, and religion as a whole, spirituality, all of that is very personal. Everyone has different experiences in it. And so our intention with this episode is not to be only negative and only say bad things, but it's also not to be overly positive either. We are just sharing our experiences and our thoughts, and because they are our experiences and our opinions, we are allowed to do that basically. I don't think we ever preface a topic with saying oh, this is why we're allowed to talk about this, but this is one that I think does deserve that disclaimer.
Yeah.
I also know at different points of my faith experience, whatever, I probably wouldn't want to listen to people talk about this. And then there's been other points where I'm I want to hear everybody's place. I want to know where everyone's at. I want to know all of these things. And so there's been podcasts that have helped me through different moments in my faith. With that though, if this is something that you don't feel comfortable listening to, it's okay if you skip this episode. Yeah. I don't think we'll ever say that about anything else. Of course we want you guys to listen. That's the whole point of having a podcast. Faith is very personal though. And so it is okay if this is not an episode that you want to listen to. We are not offended. Just kidding. Yeah. We are. Just kidding.
I am.
Just kidding. Just kidding. But yeah, I feel like I missed something that we talked about. Anything to add
Just
to that?
No, I just want to second that we all have our own experiences and we are allowed to talk about our experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also,
And
you know, like even in sharing all of this, we're not necessarily looking for people to like validate our experiences or defend your experiences and tell us why we're wrong or why we shouldn't feel that way. You know, we've spent like many years of our lives living this, and like we don't necessarily need to be told that we're wrong or that it is a certain way. And in the same way, we're not doing that to you as well if you do have differing opinions from us. And like we're always down to have like disagreement and like discussions about things that we differ with. So like people are always welcome to share that with us if they feel so inclined. But like we're all trying to be respectful here and nice, but that also means that we need to be authentic to us and like
yes.
our feelings and our experiences and not sugarcoat things or whatever. So nothing's going to be inherently bad, but just know we're not the type of people to like pretend, you know, we're pretty like upfront and honest about everything. So yeah.
And our faith journeys are also very, very personal to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's end that at that.
Yeah.
Yep. Alrighty. So before we jump into the questions, because you guys did ask quite a few questions, we want to just give a little bit of context about each of our like upbringings and stuff. A lot of you know us personally, but there are some of you who don't. So we'll keep this very, very brief. I will start. I grew up Mormon my whole life. Obviously, I'm pretty sure all of us did. But my parents were like in and out of the church pretty much up until I was born. And so I think that kind of led to a little bit of a more lax upbringing as far as like rules went. There was definitely times in our lives where we were like a little bit stricter with things. But I think because my upbringing was a little bit more lax, it kind of shaped a lot of like where I'm at currently with religion, faith, spirituality. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that for me, my mom was definitely more of like a matriarch than I think a lot of other LDS homes specifically experience. And again, I think that really impacted like where I'm at currently, because at least in my home, I never had a lot of the like negative parts of like patriarchy personally. So that's my very brief, this is who I am.
Awesome. Thanks, Brittany. Okay, I guess I'll go next. So my family, I also grew up Mormon, and we basically have been very active like my entire life, and pretty steadfast in like keeping all the standards and emphasizing like doing all of that. So we were, I feel like the best way to describe it would be very textbook Mormon, where we kind of just followed everything, did everything we were supposed to do, family home evening every week, regular scripture study. There was like rarely a Sunday that we ever skipped church. Even like sometimes if we were on vacation, we'd try to find like a ward to go to. My dad was in the bishopric twice, and so
I didn't know that.
yeah, more like when I was a little bit younger, but I think once when I was in maybe like junior high or something like that. And we were like a pretty strong family in the church, but I also never felt like it was, and this I guess goes more to my personal experience. Maybe my sisters are a little bit different, but like we still had part of our identity outside of religion. So while it was important and we were, you know, or very strict about like standards and everything like that, there was still a little part of me that we felt like it felt very normal. Didn't feel very over exaggerated. So I was kind of like, in my mind, living in an in between a little bit of the two, and definitely learned more about like being devout in a world that like wasn't. And I feel like that's probably the best way to describe it, where it's like we were never encouraged to seclude ourselves or like, you know, be like, if you're a good Mormon, you only hang out with Mormons. Like, we were very much in the world, but like not a part of the world. And if you like went to church, you know exactly what that means. So that's probably like a good brief understanding of like my generalized childhood. Yeah.
I love it. Kenzie?
Okay. I also grew up Mormon, very active family, very faithful family. My dad also like had callings in the bishopric, but at the same time, also a very progressive family. And we had a lot of very nuanced conversations. And we had a lot of hard conversations about kind of the tougher topics in the church. But yeah, very progressive, but very faithful and very nuanced.
Love.
Nice. Yeah, I grew up Mormon.
That's just going to be the title.
My mom was a convert. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like in the culture at all, really, I feel, because we were in LA. That was like a totally new thing. Like once I met you guys, like learning about like church culture. My dad was pretty strict with rules, which I don't blame him really. Like his dad was super strict. And then my mom was more, I guess, like lax, but like more about faith than rules. And when we moved to the suburbs, that's when like church, I don't know. Yeah, whatever. But I grew up Mormon. I feel like my freshman year of high school, I kind of stopped caring, kind of stopped trying to go because I was going through things, and yeah, grew up with it. Wasn't super culturally in it. Was very in the world. Yeah.
I love it. The only thing, when you said you grew up in LA, another little bit of context is that Abby, Kenzie, and I all grew up in Gilbert Mesa, Chandler, Arizona, which a lot of people say is kind of like a mini Provo. So the culture there is quite different than other areas of the United States, world, all of it. So
Yeah.
the only other thing I forgot that we were going to mention at the very beginning is there were a couple questions about mixed faith friendships specifically, and probably because like we're friends on this, obviously. We all have a lot of experience in our lives with like just a vast amount of different mixed faith friendships, relationships, family, all of the different dynamics. And so I think this is something we would probably dive more into in a full episode opposed to right now. I'm sure there will be little like tidbits that we sprinkle in through the conversation, but that's our only little other caveat.
Cool.
So,
okay, should we get into the first
question?
one?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay.
How did your attitudes towards the church change as a child versus teenager? And as an adult, how do you feel about your upbringing, positive, negative? So.
Okay.
I know for me as a kid, I was really embarrassed to be Mormon because like you couldn't like play on Sundays with your friends. So like people thought I was weird. But then like when I was 12 and like you enter Young Women's, which is like the youth program, I loved the youth program so much. I had a really great community around me. And I just dove like headfirst into like the church. And I really loved being Mormon. But then as a teenager, that embarrassment kind of came back, but for different reasons. Just because like in high school, like people will call you homophobic if you're Mormon or racist. And so like there was kind of like that shame that I didn't want people to know that I was Mormon.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah. I feel like I relate a lot to like most of that because, well, as a young child, I think everything was, I mean, it was all I knew. So everything was normal. Everything was like fun. Church was like fun, you know, because I got to hang out with my friends. It wasn't weird to me or anything. But when it came to like going to school and being friends with everybody, I always felt a little bit on the outs. And like I wasn't allowed to do certain things with them or whatever, like, you know, sleepovers and stuff. So I had this like love-hate relationship where I didn't find anything wrong with the church. I loved church, but I wanted to like fit in a little bit more with everybody else. So as a teenager, I really took on that persona of being like, I can still believe this religion and like I am still an amazing and like fun person because of that, or like despite that.
Yeah.
So like I was always trying to be, is that the right word? Or like, you know.
Yeah, no, that
Okay.
is. It's just
Yeah.
it's just funny that that's a very common feeling.
Yeah.
Like what you're sharing is very relatable.
Yeah, totally. Like I always, people would compliment me and tell me like, oh, you're actually a nice Mormon, or oh, you're actually fun, or, and I like took so much pride in that. So I was always very serious about like sticking to my standards, but still making myself likable to all of my friends at school who were not Mormon, and like trying to find like a balance and not wanting to be like a judgmental person or care what other people did. And I felt really good about that. Like as a teenager, you know, I did similar to Kenzie, like loved my community, loved the youth program, loved being around like my friends and stuff in church. And then like as I've gotten into be more of an adult, I've realized that like my strength in the church as a kid came from my community and not so much the religious aspect of it, because in college it was a little bit more difficult me to be excited about going to church when I didn't have as much of that community. And then when we all became friends and I did get that community back, church was exciting again and it was fun and everything like that. So it was a positive, like looking back overall, I did enjoy like many parts of it, but now too, as like I've changed my viewpoints on a lot of things, the like rose colored glasses, I guess, has come off, and I do see a few things for more of like what they were versus like intentions were good from like family and leaders and whatever, but like you know, there might be some more negative feelings towards it.
Yeah.
So
I think what you shared about the community side is really important too, because like in college, for example, I don't want to speak for all of us, but like we also built that community regardless of the church. Like we had a really strong group of friends that I think we leaned on. And so like, yes, Institute Church is what allowed us to all meet, but we've kept a lot of that like friendship since then too. So
totally.
that's all I wanted to say to that. I feel like, so Brooke and Scott and I were talking like 2 months ago, and I realized that like, because you both kind of touched on like the friendship side of things too. And I realized that honestly, until like my adult life, and I would say specifically like my career, I have not really had a lot of friends outside of the church. And so like my entire, like that's not to say I've never had a friend that wasn't Mormon growing up, but it was very, very limited. And so I think I've realized how much, especially now that like 99% of the people in my life probably are not Mormon, I've realized a lot of the value, in having people around you who are not the exact same as you. And it's become something that like, not that I'm sad that I didn't have that growing up, but I think I more so want to prioritize for like my kids is regardless of what it is, political views, religion, ethnicity, all of that, like I want them to grow up with people different from them, because I don't really feel like that was a part of my upbringing. I feel like my upbringing, especially childhood, high school, was all very the same person. Everyone was white, everyone was conservative, everyone was Mormon, and then sprinkle in one or two people that didn't fit that mold. And that's the only thing that kind of makes me like sad about my upbringing, I would say. But it's also like I live in Gilbert, Arizona. Like I went to a high school that was primarily Mormon. So like, of course that's what happened. And I don't feel resentful for that, but that's kind of like how I feel towards my childhood now, just because I value so much my adult life of having so many different people around me and just learning from other people's experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. What you said about it being like mostly white and conservative, and then some people that stick out, like we were the ones that stuck out, my family and I. So my upbringing, like I don't have like a positive, like looking back at it, I don't really have positive thoughts about growing up Mormon really until I came to college. And like I don't know, it was just, I forgot what I was gonna say, but like you guys were like my first group of Mormon friends. But like the good things that church brought into my life was like our close family friends. My parents did meet them in the church, so like people I've known my whole life, like I've known them from church. But like the church was never really the center of things in our friendships. And but I don't know, I just like always stuck out. Like I didn't have an enjoyable experience, especially once we moved to the suburbs. It honestly is like I hate throwing the word around, but it was like kind of traumatizing. Like
That's your experience.
It's hard for me, and it's hard for me to like go to church a lot, just like being in a place like that, like without wanting to cry. Like I don't know, it's just very difficult, and like having your parents like separate also while you're in church in a religion that's like all about family being together was like very difficult. So I don't know, it was like a really hard upbringing, but I enjoyed church once I got to college and like met you guys, because you guys were like normal and nice to me and like didn't care that I was like myself. And it's just funny because like you guys are like what brought me kind of back into church, because I was like, oh, there's people that like aren't gonna be mean. So
no, that's like so important to share too, because like you kind of mentioned this with like your family friends, but it's like for all of us, and I guess this kind of gets into like mixed faith friendships, church wasn't ever the center point, I don't think. At least I don't know what I remember of it. Like our friendship was the center point, and then like going to church together was almost just like an activity that we did. Like family home evening, it was literally an activity we went to. And so it's like, that's why I think we've stayed so close too, especially with all of our like church feeling, I don't know, church vibes have changed. Like they're all very different now, which is a great thing, I think. But I think we've been able to maintain our friendships because church wasn't ever the focal point. And so now that we take that away, we still have our friendships. And like that hasn't changed. So,
Well said.
True that.
Okay. So what were your guys' like key takeaways from growing up, from the way you grew up? Like both positive and negative, maybe your favorite thing about being Mormon as a kid, and stuff.
So my dad, oh God, nervous burp. My dad has a background in religious studies, and so he's very well versed in like Hebrew and Greek and stuff. And so when we did family scripture study, we really dove into the scriptures in a really, really deep way. And I in some way, I don't know how I process this as an adult, but as like a teenager, scripture study, and just like the conversations I had with my family, it did teach me to think about things in a very deep way, and to see nuance in things, and but also see like the symbolism in everything, and like to be encouraged to have that relationship with God and to receive personal revelation, and to know that like your personal revelation is personal to you, even if it contradicts someone else's. I think that that was really big for me as a teenager, just trying to navigate
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Kenzie,
I love that.
and that made me think of like that was always something I was really impressed when I met you and like your family, because I had never met people who were like in the church and as devout or like faithful as you guys were, but yet still actually thought for yourselves. Like I was
Well, and
always
like criticize the church,
yes,
which
I
I
was
think is
always
good.
exactly. I was taught to like, we were all vaguely taught to question and like ask questions and, find out for yourself. But like I had never met somebody who actually did and then like kind of came away with that still with a positive understanding. And so that was probably my first example from you of people who could be like, understand the nuances of everything and like still have like yes
Yeah.
Be
and all of
faithful.
that. So that was
Yeah.
really cool seeing from your perspective. And I do think like as an adult, I'm so grateful that I did like meet you guys because and understood that part of you guys, because that was my first introduction to being like really what a difference of opinion or like finding out for yourself really meant,
Yeah,
you know.
I agree.
Thank you.
100%. One of, I feel like I kind of just said all of this, so I don't want to be too redundant, but really my favorite thing was always just like, you always had something to do. And like the sense of community is like so strong, of course, because it's literally a high demand religion. But because of that, like there was always an activity, or you did always like have someone you could talk to, or like something to relate to. I don't know. I feel like I'm contradicting everything I just said. But like the community part is what a lot of people, even who like leave the church, say is like one of the best parts of it and what they miss. And then I don't know. I feel like negative parts is there's definitely just like things that I'm like, I just feel so like lack of knowledge on. Like, for example, like drinking culture and like just all of that. I was talking to a coworker recently and I was like, I don't drink personally. Like I'll take sips of y'all's drinks when we're out just to try them. But for me, like right now, I more of just want to be knowledgeable about like different things around it, because I feel like growing up, like most people have a very casual introduction, and I'm just using drinking as an example. This could apply to so many areas, but
Yeah.
they have a very casual introduction to alcohol, drinking, all of that, because like maybe they're having dinner and their family's having wine and they're like, oh, do you want to try it? Whereas like growing up Mormon, you don't get that. And so now I feel like I'm literally an adult and I know so little about drinking or about like tolerance, about eating a certain amount before it's like, yeah, you can drive now because you had like a glass of wine, things like that. And so that's one thing that I like don't really love, is that there's like adult experiences I feel very ignorant about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think the like two main positive things for me, it like kind of similar to Kenzie in a way. I really liked prayer, and I like prayer.
Same.
I feel like I was taught a lot about that, like by my mom, and having a connection to something greater. I think that's religion in general. Something for me is like there's something greater out there, and I think I'm like not strong enough as a person to like go about in life and be like, oh, there's maybe not someone out there, like there might not be an afterlife. Like that's very comforting to me, and prayer is. And then something very specific from our religion that I like, that it sounds so weird, it's called the word of wisdom, and it's basically something that we have that, and I know this is kind of weird to say that I like it, but like it kind of talks about things we should eat and drink and stuff. But I always looked at it growing up, I was like, oh my gosh, like I love health. Like I liked that it talked about not eating a lot of meat and like eating healthy, and I was like, yeah, I want to follow that. Like I like the idea of having like really healthy things in my body, and so like I enjoyed that. I just don't think it should be used against people of being like, don't drink all these things. I just think it's a good guidance.
I agree.
And
and
I
like
kind of talked about my negative things.
In combination with like Jenny and
what'd you say about our negative things?
Okay, so combining what Jenny and Brittany said, like those I feel like that's a big takeaway for me. Something that I feel really positive and grateful for is like looking back as a teenager, I'm so grateful for like standards that we did have and that were very enforced on me, specifically like word of wisdom, because all of my friends in school and in college like were not in the church. I wanted to hang out with them. I was going to parties with them. They were doing things at the party and I was just happy to be there. And I never once felt tempted about like partaking in anything because I felt very confident in like my standards. And so I'm really happy I had that because it got me to like be graduated from college and not have like a messy life or not have like destroyed things like I think it could have if I didn't have those standards. So I am really grateful that it has got me to a really good point. However, I do really agree with like Brittany as a negative is just like everything is so taboo and like talked about in like this is of the devil, so you can't even like know anything about it, and it has made me feel very stupid as an adult. Like I don't understand anything, and like if you're trying something new or trying to learn about something new, you're like, I don't even know where to start. And I feel like a big negative for me that I've learned is that not everything has to be so black and white, or like if it's bad, it doesn't have to be ignored or like never talked about. It's better to be like fully informed and learn about those things and not be afraid of like something that maybe you've chosen not to do or be a part of. So that was like relating to that. Those I think were my biggest takeaways. Just I'm grateful for my standards and where it has brought me, but I wish it wasn't so like black and white and taboo, you know?
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
What one negative thing I want to talk about that I know Kenzie can probably relate to, and probably you guys, is like the church really is a pinpoint of like looking back as a child of anxiety, like learning so many things. We have magazines in the church that you can subscribe to, and there was one for kids, and I remember there was a story about a girl and she had a feeling that she should check her shoes before she put them on, and so she like shook them and there was a black widow in it, and stories like that did not help me with faith ideas. I was just like, oh my gosh, any feeling I get, there's gonna be spiders in my shoes, there's always like any bad feeling means that something's out there. And like I also just always felt guilty and bad, and like I thought that, I don't know,
Well, like when I said the positive thing, I was like, well, I don't know how I process this as an adult, because it caused a lot of like scrupulosity, like this idea that like God is giving you promptings, he's giving you warnings about things. And I was taught, and granted this was in seminary, which is like a church class that you take during high school, and there's a lot of like folk doctrine that comes out during seminary. Like seminary teachers just, they're out here just coming up with some whack shit. But like we were taught that like if you have a prompting and you don't act on it, that is a sin. And so like, while it's amazing that I have this connection with God who can give me guidance in my life, also I could also be sinning if I don't follow it correctly. Like that was very stressful, and that caused a lot of like scrupulosity.
Did you guys
for
get
me.
told the phrase like sins of commission and sins of omission?
Not personally.
That
I
was
don't think
like
so.
a big thing
yes,
in my
yes.
life, I feel like. And
I
why
honestly
I
don't
was
think
told
I've ever heard that until right now.
really, I was told to like like not personally like Abby, you need to repent, but just in a lot
Like
of
in a
my
lesson.
classes, it was always stressed of like you not only need to repent of the sins of commission, which are like if you commit a sin, like sexual sin, drinking, you know, choosing what to wear, stuff like that, but also omission, like not reading your scriptures every day is like a sin because you're not doing it, or like not praying, or you know, if you're not following promptings, like that's a sin as well because you're not like you're choosing to ignore certain things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I was definitely taught like in Young Women's that we should be repenting every day.
Like there is something you should repent. You can repent of every single day, and so like that was part of our nightly prayers that we were supposed to do.
This is.
And when we were reading,
all I was gonna say is like this is where I think I have to like look back and like realize that maybe, and because one of the questions alluded to something like this, like did you question things as a child? And I was like, no, I never did. But now looking back, I think I realized that like I think I've always had that attitude of like if I hear something and I don't agree with it, I'm just gonna ignore it, which or not, ignore maybe isn't the right word. Well, but kind of, because I'm like, I definitely remember now that you're like talking about this, like it's bringing up like having lessons of being like, oh, you should be repenting all the time. But I think like I always just heard that and was like, I don't have anything to repent for, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think I am realizing now, and maybe that's a lot of why I'm at where I currently am. But I think I have had that opinion for way longer than I realize of like, I will take the parts that I agree with and leave the parts that I don't.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
No, totally.
I think we should definitely get into that question. Did you ever question anything as a teenager?
I'm very similar to you, Brittany. I think I actively tried to do that as a kid where I was like, I don't need to stress about these things, even though they are being taught to me, like, I'm fine, basically, is what I like tried to really take on as a kid to save unknowingly like my mental sanity and not stress about everything and not be like super concerned about my morality and stuff in those ways. However, as an adult, I'm realizing it affected me way more than I thought. I didn't have any stress about that as a kid, but now I'm looking back and I'm being like, I'm so frustrated that I even was taught that and did understand what was being taught to me, understood I didn't like it, and then did nothing about it. Like, on either side. I'm like, I'm frustrated I didn't say anything against it and like fight back, but I'm also frustrated I like, didn't care so much. So I didn't like directly disagree in the same ways. I didn't question much. I was basically absorbed a lot of things that were taught and either accepted it or didn't accept it. But I
didn't really go past that.
Right.
Yeah.
I, like I said earlier, like we, in my family, we had a lot of conversations where we were definitely encouraged to question things. And if we felt that the church was wrong on something, like that was okay. Like that was just kind of like the culture in my family. One thing that that's really sticks out to me as a teenager is learning about polygamy in seminary. My family, we had talked about it, and so when I found out that we were going to talk about polygamy in seminary, I was like, oh,
old news.
This is no big deal. Like I'll be like the one to help the struggling students in the class. But like there's something about learning there's no way to know everything about polygamy. So obviously I was learning new things, and also the context of my seminary teacher was a man, and a lot of times it is a man. Women can be seminary teachers, but a lot of the times it's a man. And given the context of, men can hold the priesthood, women can't because they are women. And I'm learning about polygamy where it was women who really got the shit end of the stick in polygamy. And my seminary teacher was just doing his job. He was trying to make it like a faith building experience, but the context of like, here's this man telling me, a woman, that, oh, there's, it's not as bad
Basically
as it
trying
seems.
to justify
Like
past men's behavior
Yeah.
in a way that makes
Yeah,
it look like men
and-
are not
and-
the like perpetrators.
and as a woman, I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I was so uncomfortable. That was like really the first time that, not the first time that I questioned things, but that's just like
But
one
it
of the
sticks out
memories that
too.
comes to, yeah. And it's interesting because, like, given the context of like how women are kind of subservient in the church, when I was upset about polygamy, like, I kind of said to myself, like, this is such a dumb thing to lose your testimony over, because I feel like it just hits women in a different way than it hits men. And so I don't know. I feel like the fact that like women and men, there's a power imbalance, like it kind of made me gaslight myself into not thinking polygamy was as big of a deal as I felt in my
I
gut
think that,
it
like,
was.
I don't know, maybe this kind of segues, but like, and I don't want this to come across like, oh, men are evil, men are the problem, because that's not what it is. But I had a friend, we were talking kind of about not polygamy, but just about being a woman in the church recently. And she was like, I just think like it's really hard to be a woman in the church. And it just is. Like, I don't know if you guys saw a couple months ago, there was the whole like woman on the stand thing. And to give context, basically there was a church in California.
Oh yeah.
San Francisco.
That their woman leadership, so like Relay Society president, women's president, I don't know exactly who, but they would sit up on the stand in church. So again, a little bit more context for people who maybe are not Mormon. When you're at like the main meeting, everyone's sitting obviously in like the congregation, and then up on like the stand is what we call it, or like it's almost
podium?
like a podium. Yeah, that's a better word for it.
Stage, whatever.
Usually there's like Bishop Brick, so the like leaders of the ward will sit up there, and then whoever's giving talks. And so this church, some woman leadership would be up there too, which is not common at all. And they were asked by higher up members of the church, like the highest that there is, to not do that anymore. And so this letter came out basically saying like, this is really great representation for women, and this is also really good for like, there's things that like those leaders are going to see in the congregation that the men might not notice. Like, there's a lot of benefits to this. And it was like, I don't really know where it's gone, but as like someone who is still in the church, I was like, yes, I would love that. Like, even to just see the representation of a woman sitting up there is huge for like little girls, especially because like I self-reflected and I was like, the church is, oh my gosh, of course we're all going to get emotional in this episode. The church is the only area of my life currently that I don't feel like I have representation in. Like, at work, for example, half of my managers and even like our highest up manager is a woman. And so as a woman, that's really great to see, because I'm like, oh, I could get there someday. Like, I'm represented. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm represented, so I know what is possible for me. Where at church, it's you sit in the congregation and you listen, and that's all that's possible for you. And so, oh my gosh, sorry. It's hard to see things like that. Yeah, someone else talk for a second.
And it's hard because, like, kind of like a saying that some people will say in the church to like justify like the whole priesthood, how only men can have it, is they'll be like, well, it's not just the fact that I have to be a man, I have to be
Yeah.
a worthy man.
Whatever.
Like, and it's like, no, the fact that I'm a woman,
disqualifies
that's
me.
like
Yeah.
automatically disqualifies
Right,
me
whether
because I
you're
am
if I'm
a woman.
worthy or
Like,
not.
it doesn't matter if I'm worthy
the
or not.
whole,
Yeah.
all of it, it's just very clear once you start to see it that like the messaging behind any of this, like polygamy, the leadership in the church, the priesthood, everything like that, is that men have power and authority and women are followers and like submissive. And that's just like a hard pill to swallow as a woman, that you're like, okay, I'm not necessarily being I'm being recognized in very like apologetic ways, but yet the messaging does not change. Or like the overall, the underlying point of that, whether they try to convince me that no, I am worthy, I am important, I do have a role, is I am still not quite this, I'm not the same level.
Right.
And like, you have more power than me, you know?
And what's crazy, sorry, like,
No, you're good.
is one of the things that they always say to us is, well, you are like God because you create children in you. And I'm like,
Yeah.
if I'm literally like God, like how am I incapable of holding positions or having these like powers, quote unquote?
Or even where
so,
is my like godly example of being a woman? Like, I mean, you could get into the whole Heavenly Mother like discussion about that, which
you can't even talk
so
about
much.
her because she's so sacred.
Yeah.
Like, you can't even say
like,
her name.
It's
Like,
not spoken about, but yet like there's still like there's recognition that like there is a woman God out there, and like we're not allowed to speak about her. So like you're not even allowed to be recognized for like being a part of creating life and all those things. So it's just so complicated.
Nobody say my name. I'm too sacred.
Never speak it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, someone did ask a question about how did growing up in the church impact you as a woman in terms of education, career, and motherhood. And I think this is a good segue into that.
I will say that, and maybe this, why I mentioned that I feel like I did grow up with my mom being a very strong matriarch, is I feel like I was always emphasized, and my dad's mom, she died before I was born, but something she always told her daughters was, you get an education and you have a career because you never know what's going to happen. And so that's something I was told my whole life. And so maybe that's just like, despite the church, just outside of it, I was always told the same things of like, get a career, get an education, because like, you just don't know what's going to happen also. And like, it's good too. And so maybe it was just one of those things where I guess like growing up, I didn't really like feel as much of that because so much of my personal life was different. I feel like I more of see, like I was just saying, that stuff in my adult life.
Yeah.
Of like not feeling the representation.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like there's a lot of layers to this for me, so I'm going to try to like speak about it as briefly and as like quickly as possible. But
no, take your time because you are
Yeah.
your mom,
I was going to say,
so.
you have experience that none of us can speak to.
it's definitely affected me in a lot of ways. Like growing up, I always fit the mold, like in the sense that I never really had to fight too hard to be what like the church kind of wanted like women to be. But I was still taught things like education is important, career is okay, like, you know, you don't have to get married.
You're allowed.
You're allowed to have a career. Like it was always understood that I don't have to get married immediately and I don't have to have kids immediately and I can have a career and these things. But I fit the mold, and the path that was laid out for me was very clear, and I was, in my mind, 100% okay with that. So my mom got a bachelor's degree, and that was a really great example for me of like, you should go to college and get a bachelor's degree. But she was also a stay-at-home mom. And she's like, I'm happy I did it even if I am a stay-at-home mom. And I was like, I'm going to follow in your footsteps. So I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get a bachelor's degree, and then I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And while I'm at school, I was like, I want to get married my junior year of college. I want to have kids like soon after I graduate. Like I had a plan that was just so easy for me to accept, but it was never forced down my throat in a way that was taught as like, your role as a woman is to grow up to be a mother. Like that was taught to me in a doctrinal sense, like general authorities.
But not in an
were
Abby,
teaching
you
us,
do this.
but not in a parents telling me, Abby, you must marry somebody. Now, they were kind of saying it in other ways of, you know, every time they see you at a family event, it's like, are you dating anybody? Oh, are you guys going to get married? You know, very subtle, not direct, not as like, this is our expectation, but just like, and that's just culture. That's just the culture behind it of like, the next thing to look forward to is marriage. So that definitely laid out my life for me and kind of made me feel like I did have a purpose at the time. And then as I put that into action. And as I started to like, you know, kind of go through more of my faith journey and stuff, I recognized that like, I didn't really put up a fight in this. I didn't really like care that much. And I was just like happy to do what I was like told. And that was kind of really hard for me to like come to terms with. So now as a mother, my perspective is very much, I want to teach my child of like my understanding now and be like, I'm not ever going to push any agenda on her. Like if she wants to ask me about certain like paths, I will tell her and explain to her what like some of those paths are. But like, I don't want to put any of that pressure, whether it's direct, indirect, passive, you know, whatever, on her. And a big reason why like we even decided to leave the church was because of my child. Like I could for years, for probably like a year to 2 years before we made that decision, I was going back and forth a lot, doing a lot of the mental gymnastics to make everything make sense, to make it fit in my life now. And I was perfectly fine with that. But then once I had a kid and I kept thinking about like, she's going to grow up and I'm going to have to take her to church. She's going to learn one thing. Then we're going to go home and I'm going to have to tell her all the reasons why I don't believe that. Very similar to how like you explained, Kenzie, of like your childhood. And I really, really didn't want that life for her. I didn't want that life for me. I didn't want to be stuck in that position. And no matter how much I can control the narrative in my house, that doesn't necessarily mean that the narrative will be the same outside of the home. And I was just like, I would rather not have that pressure be put on her at all. So as a mother, I'm really grateful that I've like made those decisions to step away, because I think in the end, like, I'm more confident in my abilities as a mother, because I don't have to listen to someone else's guidebook of parenting, but I can listen to my own, you know?
Yeah, that's beautifully said.
Sorry,
like,
that was too long.
Put in a little applause.
No,
Thank you.
not at
Thank
all.
you. Yeah.
I want to add on to that because, like, I was definitely encouraged to go to college when I was in high school. I told my dad I wasn't going to go to college, and he like got mad at me. And my mom got her bachelor's while I was in high school, and that, very similar to Abby, that kind of like encouraged me to get my bachelor's and stuff. But still, mothers in the church are held on like the highest pedestal. And so that was always like my goal. And I mean, I remember watching like an institute, like church videos about like women that were being praised for leaving their careers to stay at home with their kids. Like, so it's
The irony of that.
while,
Yes,
you know,
totally.
yeah. But also, like in my young women's experience, like my leaders were like, please get an education, because you never know what's going to happen. Your husband might die, like whatever. You just never know. but I don't know if, well, whatever. But I think as a teenager, like when back in like 2014, when like every interviewer was asking like female celebrities if they were a feminist, and I was like, oh, what is feminism? Am I a feminist? Like, I immediately thought of like, okay, are there any places in my life where I feel like I am put into a box where I feel like I am less than? And the first place I thought of was the church. And so that, like, the church really pushed me into like feminism. And yeah, that's it. And obviously, like, now I am not a mom, I'm not a wife, but like I idolized that growing up. Like I used to daydream about like getting married in the temple and having babies and stuff, but life just does weird things to you.
Life
You
just be
change.
weird.
For me, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because in a way, like it didn't impact, I don't know, it didn't impact me in a negative way because I feel like we were so disconnected from like the culture of it all that I was always like, oh, I'm going to go get a career, go to college. And I also like women in church. I remember like talking to some like moms of my friends and they're like, yeah, like do what you have to do because like right now I'm having to do it all and it's hard. Like I'm having to get my education now and things like that and like putting it off. I don't know, something I feel weird about in the church, and it's kind of controversial, not really, it's just hard to say in the correct way, I think, but like what I don't like about it, and I'll preface it by saying it's amazing to like be a stay-at-home mom. Like I think everyone should be able to do what they want, but I feel like in the church it's just a weird cycle of like raising women and being like, go out and do these amazing things, like get an education, do these incredible things, but then after that stay home and like don't go out and do more. And like we're kind of like bred to make more men to go out into the world, and like you raise, I just hear about like, especially when I hear about like Arizona and like all the valedictorians were like Mormon girls and stuff, and then they become moms, which like I'm sure they want to, but also maybe they were like taught their whole life and didn't see another path.
Yeah.
It's just really weird and to me to raise women and have them do amazing things and then you stay home and you don't really pursue anything outside of children, and then it just continues with every girl after that.
Yeah. I will say, I think that's starting to change a little bit with like our generation, because I think it's starting to be way more common for like stay-at-home dads, or I mean, also just realistically, economically wise, most people have to have dual income anyways. But like when I think about like my like personal examples that I look out at, almost everyone, like the woman is working either as well or instead of. So, but again, I'm just speaking to like what I observe as a whole. And I think older generations, that's not quite the case.
Yeah. Jenny, you said something really interesting that made me also think that it goes into like other things as well. When you said like you go out, you get an education, you have life experiences, and then you go back to being a mom. It's like, in my mind, immediately goes to how the intention behind it is like, and I was kind of taught this unknowingly as well, like you go out to do, like, we know the answer in the end, and so everything you do now, you're still going to end up there because that's like your end goal. Like, never encouraged, go out to get an education, to find what you want to do, to go do these things. Don't go travel to find new experiences, to figure out what experiences you want to implement. It's literally like, go out to experience it for yourself, but then come back. And it kind of also reminds me of the messaging behind like prayer to me, or like, you know, they kind of taught us about like in the Book of Mormon, there's like one of the last chapters is something like, after you have read this book, now I encourage you to pray about it to find your answer that this is the truth, right? Well, it gives your answer in the question right there. Like it says, pray about it to know that what I am telling you is the truth. Not to know if it is true or if it is not true, but to know that what I am telling you is the truth. And so it's like there's
Good old Moroni
there's
challenge.
this weird thing that I feel like I've started to recognize in the past and stuff about anything like that, whether it's about doctrine, whether it's about lifestyle, the way I live my life, the standards, whatever. It's like you are encouraged to maybe try something new to still find out that our way is the better way, you know? So that just made me think of that as women. It's like, women, you can go get an education, but with the intention to still come back, because that's where your true like purpose should be in the end, or something like that. I don't know.
And it's interesting, Brittany, like you said, your examples of like what you see, like for me, like our friend group, like Abby and Sydney, you're like the only ones that are like different. Every single person I know from my like home ward that has a kid, the mom is like that are my age, like the mom is stay at home, or like the student ward at Jacob's school when we were there. Every single that student ward was made up of all men in school, and they all had wives that were staying at home with their children, which is just interesting. And I think everyone has the right and like if that's what you want, but I also think we're raised with, like you said, Abby, like no other real choices. It's like you're gonna go out and experience and come back.
Yeah.
It's almost like we say like, oh yeah, I'll go get a degree or whatever to like appease
Like I did
the women, the women that won't shut up about and then it's like, but at the end of the day, like being a mom is the best role.
I've gotten into this discussion with somebody on TikTok on accident, because I was listening to I was watching like a clip that Haley Raw posted from the Girls Camp podcast, and it was about motherhood, and like one of the comments was like, I don't know why Mormons think that this messaging is just about their religion, like, and I think she's Mormon as well, but it's like that's something that's been taught to us from the 50s. It's a worldly thing. It's not just a Mormon thing. And I think that's true. Like, yes, traditionally women stay home. Like, it's always been the tradition. I think with Mormonism, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is like there is a certain holiness attached to it. And that's like what it all comes down to for me, is that like the messaging of people, prophets in General Conference, teaching us that women, there is nothing more special for you to fulfill the role of being a mother. Like, that's not even me making that perception. Like, that is,
it's directly said,
literally what they have said. So just the holiness and divinity that is associated with motherhood, I love it. I love that like we put like share the message that mothers are important, and that the job is just as hard and just as fulfilling as a career.
Absolutely.
However, that doesn't mean that like there's also no messaging about having a career can be the most fulfilling thing ever. Like,
right.
Or maybe not even having kids.
At all. You know, that is your purpose. That is your role. And if you do that, you are holy. That's kind of like how I have perceived it.
Well, and that's where it gets hard, because then like if you are someone who is just having a career or can't have kids or doesn't want to have kids yet or whatever, like internally, whether it's subconscious or not, you may start to doubt your own worth too.
Right.
And that's what's really hard, because like I'm not a mom yet, I'm working, and like I'm sure there's some subconscious part of me that's like, do I have as much value as a mom? And that shouldn't ever be a thought. All that to say, mothers are absolutely incredible.
Absolutely. Feminism is about letting women do whatever they want to do, not must have a career. Like, you know, if you want to be a mother, that's great. So anyways,
What one last thing, like Abby, what you said about like people saying, "Oh, it's a world thing," like that's totally true. But also, like historically looking at the church, like I remember reading a book about it. We were pretty like woman progressive back in the day, like early 1900s, and then
with like the Relief
when stuff
Society.
started, yeah, and when stuff started happening with like the Equal Rights Amendment and just like civil rights, like the church like doubled down. So like we didn't grow with the world. Like we became smaller. Like we took things away actually from women empowerment in our church. And I don't know, so it's just interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Next topic.
Move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So the next one is, what would you classify yourself as? Mormon, nuanced, ex-Mormon, etc.
I kind of feel like we've
touched on it, but I guess we could say explicitly if like we want to.
But this also says, while faithful, what was your biggest faith crisis that you reconciled or pushed through to remain active? So I guess maybe that'd be more of a question for Abby and I.
Oh, I don't even know.
Well, didn't it ask that you push through and stay?
I think we could all probably speak to that.
Yeah. Oh,
we can probably end on this too. I don't know. I feel like
do a part 2.
Yeah. I feel like I mean, like I've said, like I still go to church. I would say I'm very nuanced. I don't know. There's been so many things that are like faith crisis. I feel like there's a new thing every other day.
Yeah.
The biggest thing for me, and I don't know that I've pushed through this, I actually have not, is definitely like everything around LGBT as a whole. Like I just personally disagree with the church's stance, and I will be very open about that. That's probably been like the biggest catalyst for just my faith transition as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, do you want to answer real quick?
Oh yeah, sure. I don't know. I'm.
It's hard to label it too.
It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, like the thing I just have always held on to is just prayer, really, and like sometimes like some of the scriptures and some talks. But I don't know. I've honestly been in a faith crisis since I was literally 9 years old. Like, as a kid, I recognized everyone was white and everyone was a man, and all of my family, none of them are members, and so, like, outside of my immediate family, like, so it was hard being like, I don't know. So it's just been a crisis since day one. Of like, and I don't know. I feel like I don't push through it. Like I just kind of exist, and I like the things I like, and like I struggle a lot with a lot of things, and I just don't know where I am. But I feel like that's okay. Like what's weird is like why it's weird that this is a thing in our church. Like other people in other religions just like live like this, and it's not.
Yeah, it's not a thing.
They're just going through life.
I was thinking
100%.
about this actually in depth the other day. I had a little conversation with myself about it in the car as I was picking up Atlas. So like for 30 minutes I was just talking to myself. Here's like my thoughts about this specifically. Because other religions, you can kind of be half in, half out. You can believe what you want to believe. There's not really any... I mean, at least from what I understand, there's not so much this emphasis of being like the perfect Christian, the perfect Catholic. Like there is some of that and still some of that pressure, but like I just don't see it as much. And I'm like, why can't the like LDS Church just as a religion be a religion that people just go to, feel good about, like on a Sunday activity, and then like they can do what they want with it and they believe what they want like anything else.
Yeah.
And still consider themselves Mormon if they want. And I think it comes down to the temple and the worthiness behind it, because the messaging that is shared is so much like the most important thing you can be as a member is temple worthy, and you must strive your entire life to be temple worthy. And in order to be temple worthy, you have to follow all the rules. And if you're not worthy, there's so much shame about that. So like there's, for example, I've seen members of the church who are like gay and married but go to church because they like it, and that is totally fine for them. But there is still always going to be this like thought around the community where like, well, they're not worthy to go to the temple, so they're not like really doing the best that they can, right? There's still something wrong with them because they don't have their temple recommend. And I think that will always be the way people see it. It will always have to be so black and white unless the temple doesn't become a thing, you know? And then it's like this elitist system where it's like, if you can go to the temple, then you're better than everybody else. And we need to help other people try to go to the temple. And if you can't, then you need to repent so that you can. Like there's always that focus. And it's always tied to worthiness and like salvation and stuff like that. That's my understanding of everything now. Yeah. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree.
No, I think that was very well put. I agree. And I think it affects like your internal worth, which is sad.
Yeah. Like some people I think can be totally okay with just like, no, I feel better about not needing to have a temple recommend and I'm cool with that. And that's awesome for them. But like, I don't think that's the majority of members, you know?
And that's not what you're taught. You're not taught to like be okay with not having
the apostles in the first presidency would say otherwise.
Yeah. Kenzie, anything to add?
I think for me the biggest thing was LGBT stuff, women, and like polygamy. And can I address really fast the question?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. This kind of goes into one last question. So I'm an ex-Mormon. If the church allowed LGBTQ people full membership and they allowed women to receive the priesthood, would that change your opinion of the church? Because this was something that I wanted to address, because this was something that I like had to push through while I was active. I really did believe that the church would eventually change. And no shade to whoever asked this question. I don't love this question because it minimizes the LGBT and the women issue to just simply policies. And it's just policies that could just change with a snap of a finger. And it minimizes the fact that like for gay people, like the church emotionally and mentally abused them to fit them into this box. And that is what is unsettling and uncomfortable. How many gay kids have wanted to kill themselves because of the church's teachings? And then also like, if the church gave women the priesthood, that doesn't change the fact that the church has a history and a pattern of men abusing their power, their priesthood authority to make women subservient to them. We saw this in polygamy when, in my opinion, Joseph Smith groomed teenagers. Like that is, you can't change that. So in my opinion, the bridges have been burned. Policy changes aren't going to change the abuse. It would need to be so much more than
that. And even at that, it doesn't undo the past.
But yeah, but those issues, those are things that I pushed through. I did think that like, oh, eventually, you know, church isn't perfect right now, but eventually one day it will be perfect and it'll make up for everything that has happened.
It's like no matter how much the church changes to become this perfect like thing in your mind, like your definition of what a perfect religion could be, it's still rooted in all that history that you can't change.
You can't change.
And
you can't
so
change the
different.
past.
in order to have something, like, you basically have to wipe the whole thing in order to, like, make something really what it, like,
Yeah,
you want.
need to start
you know?
over.
And I want to say, at least for me, every single institution is effed up. Like, every single institution has, like, problematic history. I think for me, my opinion, I can hold my religion to the highest of highest standards because it is my salvation. It's my eternal life. So at the end of the day, it just wasn't worth
Yeah.
putting energy into
Yeah.
anymore for me.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, just really quickly, for me and my experience, for like the last 5 years, probably like since I went to school, I don't even know, even longer than that, there were always things I disagreed with, but I was okay with it, and I was still going to, like, try to be as righteous as I could according to those things, as long as I believed that, like, the doctrine of the church, which in my mind was the church was true, Jesus is, like, Savior and, like, in the atonement. And if those things always remained true, then, like, unfortunately, everything else that I disagreed with was something that I had to, like, live with. And it wasn't so much as, like, in my mind, a belief system, but as, like, capital T truth. Like, these are facts. And if this is the way to heaven, if this is the thing this is what happens when I die, then I don't know how I could say no, because that's the truth, right? That is literally what happens. And going against that, like, I would know that I'm still doing something wrong, and in the end I want to end up there. So it was less about the religion in a sense and more just about those doctrines.
Yeah.
And then but so I disagreed with a lot, and I didn't like everything surrounding the narrative of, like, LGBTQ. I didn't like the women not having the priesthood. I didn't like church history. I didn't like Joseph Smith. But, like, at the end of the day, didn't matter because God was in control. So in order, like, my thing that really caused everything to, like, fall apart was just deconstructing that idea of, like, God. And at the end of the day, when I look back on it, I see I believed this because this was what got to me first. Like, this is what I grew up as. This is what I was taught. I never questioned if it, like, wasn't true. I don't even know if I really ever had, like, spiritual experiences confirming it. Like, if when I asked myself the question, why do I believe this? It came down to because I was told, and that's what I believed. Never once, like, I prayed about it and I had this revelation. So for me, that was such a big thing where it's like, I'm never going to know for certain if it is or isn't. I'm never going to be able to, like, figure it out and know the truth. And the truth was so important to me. And I ended up having to choose the part that was causing me less anxiety and less stress and less of that conflict, and something that I felt was, like, better for me. So
Absolutely.
in terms of, like, what was your biggest faith crisis, it all kind of happened
Everything.
at once, because I never had a crisis with, like, everything else until, like, those essential doctrines were, like, deconstructed, you know?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
There is so much more we could dive into too.
I know.
But
Like, we need to do, like, a 4-part episode because I have so many, like, stories and, like, questions. I feel like I want to, like, Brittany and I to talk about and, like, deconstruct why we're even in this, which I'm always questioning. It's like, why would I be part of
same.
it? Like, there's just so many things to go about.
yeah.
We'll ask you guys what else you want to get into, but that is all we have time for today, sadly.
Yes.
And I want everyone's stories.
I know. It is hard
we'll
with
do a
4
stories
people.
episode. We'll do more, but
It is hard.
thank
but
you for listening to this if you've made it through all the way. And just last little thing is just be kind about all this, because this is our personal experience. And like you saw, some of us are a little emotional about this. And so it is very, very personal to us. So We love you all. We're grateful that you give us the space to talk about things that are important to us. And that's all.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great
Peace
week.
out. Listen to us every
Goodbye.
week, in case you didn't know.